Yair Rodriguez will be facing Brian Ortega at UFC Fight Night, Moreno vs Royval 2 for possible featherweight championship contention. Let's talk about it. All right, Yair Rodriguez, phenomenal kickboxer. Guy has deadly kicks, explosive power, has really good hands too, can catch you going forwards, can catch you going backwards. But this guy's style is, I come here to finish you. Every shot is loaded with power, with just the worst intentions. They should just call this guy Bad Intentions Rodriguez because he has no good intentions. Everything is designed to kill you that he throws. Guy also has very good BJJ. I wouldn't say it's phenomenal, but it's very good. You don't want to get caught in one of his triangles. The guy does threaten triangles quite often, and it's something that he's able to do quite easily. He has good flexibility in his hips, in his legs, good mobility, and it just looks really tight and really painful and really scary. I don't know, maybe not painful is the right word, but just really scary to be in the triangle of Yair Rodriguez. So don't find yourself there. Sometimes he does get a little overzealous. One thing I've noticed in a lot of Yair Rodriguez's fights is that once he starts to feel himself, he does rush in, and sometimes he gets a little too overly aggressive, and it leads to him getting caught. He doesn't have a bad chin, and he has good heart. However, he is susceptible to getting dropped. It happens a lot, and a lot of times it's his own fault. It's because he's trying to go on the all-out assault like he's got to finish after he just lands a 1-2. Sometimes I think that he could benefit greatly from being a little bit more patient and trying to stay outside, at range or just outside of range a little bit instead of trying to rush in and try to get the finish all the time. That's just my personal opinion. Guy has decent takedown defense. However, he can be out-wrestled and out-grappled. We've seen that a lot. The technique just quite isn't there for high-level wrestling. And he doesn't seem to have the same physicality on the ground that he does on the feet. On the feet, he looks very strong, powerful, and explosive. And typically is the one that is, I would say, definitely showing the one to have more prowess on the feet against his opponents. But when it comes to the grappling, that same aura isn't there. He definitely is just, he's not at quite the same level as some of the top level grapplers in that division. However, he does have good takedown defense. He looks like a really strong guy. He's lengthy, so I'm sure it's really tough to take him down. However, it does happen. And a lot of times, that's also kind of his fault too, because he throws so many kicks. And he just kind of, he does throw kicks with a lot of power, and he throws a lot of them. Sometimes he throws kicks and they get caught. And they get caught because, the opponent eventually reads it after you throw the same kind of kick combination or the same kick to the same position. Eventually it gets caught. And I don't know what it is, because he just doesn't have the same physicality in the grappling. He can get taken down from sweeps and trips. That does happen. But as far as to physically take him down, you usually have to hurt him. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. Or he has to be tired and it has to be like late in the fight, or you have to be a decently high level grappler in the featherweight division. In the Max Holloway fight, I would say he started that fight out pretty strong, and I would say he was actually winning that fight in the first round. He won that first round, and he was actually winning the second round too. But Max Holloway started to catch his groove a little bit, and I think Max Holloway got a takedown in the second round, was able to tire Rodriguez out a little bit. And from there on out, Rodriguez still showed to be superior on the feet, landing a lot of brutal calf kicks, destroyed the calf of Max Holloway. Max Holloway had to resort to grappling, but he was just good enough on the feet to be able to get those entries for those takedowns, and then he was able to get those takedowns because Max Holloway is an underrated grappler, I think. A lot of people know him for his boxing, but I think he's a really good grappler too. And he's got good wrestling, and he's able to take guys down also. And he resorted to that. I think actually Yair Rodriguez got caught, or he went for a takedown, or something happened. I can't remember exactly what it was. Shoot, I didn't list it down here. But Anyway, Max Holloway ended up getting the like what he was going for, because he was trying to go for the takedown, I believe, in the third, and he ended up getting it from something that Yair did. I think Yair went for a takedown himself, or got caught, or something happened. And then from there on out, Max Holloway was resorting to the grappling to sort of catch himself up to the fight, because on the feet it was going in Yair's favor. So shout out to Max Holloway for, switching up the game plan, and showing us that we can't underrate his grappling and wrestling. In the fifth round, though, I think Yair finished strong. I think he won the fifth round. Brutalized the calf of Max Holloway. He was throwing a lot of good kicks. I think he threw a lot of good body kicks, head kicks. Was just catching Max Holloway more, I think, in that round. Max wasn't able to get the takedown like he wanted in that round, I don't believe. So it was a strong finish from Yair. Josh Emmett, that was a great performance by Yair Rodriguez as well. He got caught in that fight by Josh Emmett in the first round, which led Josh Emmett to be able to get the top control and land a lot of ground and pound, because up until that point it was pretty much just Josh Emmett getting picked apart by Yair Rodriguez. He got kicked with a nasty body kick. Yair also landed I think he landed a head kick too in that round, and he was just piecing Josh Emmett a good head kick. Of course he lands, they land many glancing blows, but a really good head kick. Just overall, he was piecing Josh Emmett up on the feet, but because he got a little over aggressive and a little reckless, looking for the finish, like he always does, he got caught, which gave Josh Emmett a pretty big moment. But I still think he won that first round, because from the bottom he was able to do a lot of damage to Josh Emmett, which is another good trait that Yair Rodriguez has. If a guy isn't able to stifle him and constantly keep him thinking, and constantly not allow him to get into position that he wants, allow him to get into that full guard and get his hips where he wants, he's actually really good off his back. He can throw some pretty scary elbows, some pretty slicey elbows. So another good trait from Yair Rodriguez. And then, he was able to get the triangle from Josh Emmett in the second round, because he was just beating the crap out of Josh Emmett. Went for the flying knee. Josh Emmett got a half-hearted takedown. Didn't try anything really, because by that point he was gassed and hurt and just really kind of beat up from Yair Rodriguez. And then Yair Rodriguez got the triangle, so that was a great performance by him. Now in the Volkanovski fight, we didn't get to see much from Yair until the third round, I believe, third or fourth round, whatever round he was finishing. I think it was the third round. Yeah, he was pretty much stifled in that fight by Volkanovski. Volkanovski just showed him levels in the grappling, was able to stifle the offense of Yair Rodriguez. I do think Yair Rodriguez landed a couple good head kicks and body kicks in that third round before he was finished by Volkanovski. But I think him being finished was just due to him getting caught, and him kind of, once he was caught, he knew the takedown was coming. He knew there wasn't much he can do from it, and he kind of just let it happen. I do think that Yair is looking to bounce back from that heavy. Now the division is, seemingly wide open. He could have a good beef with Ilia Topuria. There's already a storyline there. Then I think that would be a great fight too, because Ilia Topuria really hasn't dealt with someone as dynamic on the feet as Yair Rodriguez, and Yair Rodriguez is primarily a kickboxer, and Ilia Topuria is primarily a boxer. So that would be an interesting matchup too. I do think that the winner of this fight is likely going to be the next featherweight championship challenger. If the Sean O'Malley Ilia Topuria fight isn't made. That's if Sean O'Malley beats Chito Vera. But anyway, let's talk about Brian Ortega. Excellent BJJ. Amazing guillotine. The guillotine that he had on Volk. If that was any other human being on planet Earth other than Volkanovski, he would have gotten that submission. But, other than that, Brian Ortega, his submissions in the UFC speak for themselves. Guy also has decent striking. He's sneaky. Both of these guys are sneaky. I want to point out. Both of these guys are actually, I would say, pretty evenly matched, too. He has good read for counters, Ortega. They both are really good at reading for they both have good reads for counters. I would say the biggest separation as far as physical attributes, as far as them two, on Brian Ortega's favor, is the chin and the heart of Brian Ortega. I think he has more heart and more chin than Yair Rodriguez, and that's not like a personal attack on Yair Rodriguez. That he's not passionate about being a fighter, that he doesn't want to win, that he doesn't want to give it his all. But when you're under the state of like massive fatigue and you've been beat up and your body hurts and you're just withered away and you've kind of, your dignity's kind of been taken from you because you're getting beat. I think Brian Ortega can handle that. I think he can handle those effects better than Yair Rodriguez. That's all I'm saying in the octagon. That's all. And Brian Ortega does have a lot of heart and one hell of a chin. He's also got decent power himself. Brian Ortega, though, isn't like the greatest kicker. He's not nearly as snappy or as powerful of a kicker as Yair Rodriguez, or as powerful. But the guy has a lot of heart, and he stays in there even when he's tired, even when he's exhausted, even when he's beat up. He does stay in there. He's got decent wrestling. Not great wrestling, but decent wrestling. A downside of Brian Ortega on the feet is he is somewhat plotty. I don't want to say he's like, Korean zombie plotty, but he is kind of, he does kind of move kind of slow and just kind of inches forward and doesn't do a whole lot to really create angles or to get in position to land powerful strikes. He definitely prefers to be the counter striker, and and if opponents are quick and fast and have good striking, good boxing, good kickboxing, they can present a bit of a problem with Brian Ortega, because he does like to fight at range and kind of take his time, and he likes to calculate things a little bit more. For some reason on the feet, Brian Ortega doesn't seem to be able to be quite as quick at coming out with reads as far as in the exchange when things are happening, such as like a Yair Rodriguez or a Max Holloway, the guys that can really flow. Guys that are very fluid when it comes to striking. Brian Ortega just quite isn't there. He just doesn't quite have the same speed. But I think he counterbalances that with the threat of his submission and his chin. Let's talk about some of his performances. We'll talk about the Korean Zombie performance. He dominated Korean Zombie. If you look back in that fight, if you look back at that fight in hindsight, though, you can kind of see that a lot of that was due to Korean Zombie style and probably, his fight career, his fight age, the effects of that too. Because Korean Zombies performances after that were pretty much of the same affair. If you're able to just kind of outbox him, move away, and just not get backed up against the cage, if you're kind of if you're able to move enough and have good enough footwork to stay away from Korean Zombies counters and not get backed up against the cage, you can do pretty well against them. The guy doesn't shoot a lot of takedowns. He doesn't throw a lot of kicks. He kind of just looks for that overhand right, the counter overhand right, that counter left. He's a counter puncher, and he's plotty, very plotty, doesn't create a lot of angles. So I'm not going to look too much into that fight for Brian Ortega. However, I did watch it because if Brian Ortega is allowed to calculate and is allowed to fight at range, he's actually got pretty good striking, nasty elbows, and again, very sneaky. Can come up with some pretty sneaky counters too. In the Holloway fight, he just wasn't able to find his range because of Holloway's constant pressure. I mean, he fought, he was in the fight the whole time, don't get me wrong, but he just wasn't quite able to find his range to get anything offensively working for him as far as the striking goes. Max Holloway, not an easy guy to out grapple with. Kind of the antithesis of a lot of BJJ guys. Max Holloway is very good at defending submissions and very good at anti-wrestling. So Brian Ortega just had a really hard time with that fight. He showed a lot of heart and a lot of chin, though, and there were moments where he did catch Max Holloway and did hurt Max Holloway and was able to show that he was still in the fight. But he just wasn't quite physical enough to, get the takedown or to impose his will with the type of style that, that he would be able to use against a guy like Max Holloway, because he's not able to work on that same speed. He'd have to be able, he'd have to be, explosively powerful, with his 1-2 approach, his, one punch, kind of slower combination approach. So it didn't really work out for him in the Max Holloway fight. He showed a lot of heart and a lot of chin in that fight, even though he wasn't able to show up for the 5th round. I mean, who can blame the guy? He had a lot of damage to his face. And by that point, it just, seemed pretty much pointless to continue. Now, the Volkanovski fight, I think, is a very underrated performance by Brian Ortega, because Brian Ortega did catch Volkanovski a lot in this fight. And he looked good early. You could argue that Brian Ortega won the first round if you wanted to. He chopped the lead leg of Volkanovski too, did really well. Just a really good first round for Brian Ortega. But then Volkanovski stepped on the gas and didn't let Brian Ortega really calculate and work at his pace like he wanted to, which is something that I feel like Brian Ortega really needs to be able to do well on the feet. At least against the higher level guys. Obviously against lower level guys and regular people, Brian Ortega is amazing on the feet. But for the higher level guys, he does need a little bit more time in that space to operate. Volkanovski stepped on the gas, started catching Brian Ortega, hurting him a little bit, frustrating him, not letting him think enough. But then Brian Ortega pulled that amazing guillotine in the 3rd round. Volk's head was purple. He was choking him like crazy. If that was any other man, I do believe they would have tapped that submission. That was a fight-ending submission. That was great from Brian Ortega. And before he got the submission, he actually caught Volkanovski with the left hand, I believe. So he dropped him, and then he jumped right on the neck of Volkanovski. Beautiful performance. And then I think he went for the Darce right after he went for the guillotine, if I'm not mistaken. Wasn't able to get either one. Unfortunately, Volkanovski is an absolute beast. He was able to out-wrestle, or he was able to outlast the grip of Brian Ortega, and then use effective grappling, mixed with his crazy strength and athleticism to effectively get out of that position, out of that scary place with Brian Ortega. And he continued to, operate the way he wanted to for the rest of the fight. Pretty much controlled the rest of the fight. But Brian Ortega showed a lot of heart in that fight even. He got beat down, but he did attempt. Oh no, it was the triangle. He went for the triangle after he went for the guillotine. It was a triangle. Both attempts are great too. If it was any other man, they would have tapped to it. But Brian Ortega showed a lot of heart in those fights. Even in defeat, I think his performances should be praised. A lot of people are talking about the inactivity of Brian Ortega. I can somewhat, I can see a lot of the arguments that he shouldn't be ranked as high as he is, and he shouldn't be facing an opponent as highly ranked as Yair Rodriguez because of the level of inactivity. And, I don't disagree with all of that, actually. I don't disagree with that, but I do want to play devil's advocate. And I'm not saying which is right or which is wrong, but even in defeat, Brian Ortega still shows that he is very high level, because in these fights where he lost, even though he was getting beat, he still showed that he was in the fight. He was still able to catch Volk. Even though he was losing those rounds, he was still able to hurt him. He still had the threat that he could submit these guys. Still showed a lot of heart. They weren't able to finish him. Max Holloway didn't finish him. He just didn't come out for the 5th round. And with the, in the fight with Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega, their first fight, nothing really happened in that fight. Both guys were hitting each other on the feet, tagging each other on the feet. Yeah, and I believe that who went for the armbar? It was, Ortega went for the armbar, or he was getting armbarred, and then his shoulder popped out. So nothing really happened. Like, we really didn't get to see anything. A lot of people are saying that, Ortega was getting lit up by Yair, but he was hitting Yair too. And it wasn't like it was so one-sided yet. So nothing really happened. I don't really have a lot to say about their first fight. I honestly didn't even put anything in my notes about their first fight because to me it just doesn't matter. But I do want to play devil's advocate and say that, Brian Ortega does show up when he shows up. And I do see the other arguments, that he shouldn't be getting this opponent, after having, such a long bout of inactivity. But their last fight ended on a pretty crappy note. I do think this is a matchup a lot of people want to see. I want to see this matchup. I think it's a pretty even matchup because Yair is the better guy on the feet, but he's got some weaknesses and holes on the feet. And I think Brian Ortega is the better guy when it comes to the ground game. So I think it's a pretty well-balanced fight. And I also think Brian Ortega does have a little bit more heart and a little bit more chin than Yair Rodriguez. But Yair's tenacity when it comes to the striking and overall dynamic ability when it comes to the striking, I think it is quite a big bone. It is quite a big benefit in Yair's favor. So I think this is a pretty evenly matched fight. And honestly, if I have to pick a victor, I think I'm gonna go Brian Ortega. I could see Brian Ortega getting a submission in the third round because he's not the easiest guy to finish. I don't think Yair is going to be able to finish Brian Ortega early. And I think because Brian Ortega starts off pretty well generally in all his fights. I think he's going to start off well in the first round against Yair. They're both kind of a good first round. You might see Yair win the second round. But I think in the grappling exchanges, you could see them go to Brian Ortega if there are any. And I think he is going to try to make some grappling exchanges happen. And I think that's going to tire Yair out a little bit. And I think in the third round, Yair could get reckless and get caught, or get reckless and get taken down. And if he gets caught or taken down against Yair Rodriguez in the third round, I could see, or against Brian Ortega in the third round, I could see Yair Rodriguez getting submitted. I could see Brian Ortega with a nasty guillotine, honestly, kind of like one he pulled on Volk, and then transitioning to a triangle. If he isn't able to get the guillotine or something, or an armbar, I could see Brian Ortega taking this by submission in the third round. So that's going to be my pick. Honestly, I'm going to pick Brian Ortega. I know Yair Rodriguez has something to prove with this division being wide open. And he's going to come out strong. But I think Brian Ortega is looking at that championship belt too. He's tried to get it a couple times, wasn't quite there. Well, now both of those guys, probably aren't going to get a title shot anytime soon. And I think Brian Ortega, showed in those fights that he's still high enough level to compete with those guys. Maybe not beat him, but to compete with them. So I think he's on the same level as a guy like Yair Rodriguez. This is a good matchup. I'm really eager to see this fight play out. And I'm going Brian Ortega, third round submission. But that's just my opinion. Let me know your guys' opinion down in the comments below. If you like the video, please give it a like. If you like the content, give it a subscribe. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.